More now on our top story, the SNC-Lavalin controversy. One of the central figures in the affair is Gerald Butts. Justin Trudeau's former top advisor was one of those who allegedly pressured Jody Wilson-Raybould. Butts resigned from the Prime Minister's office 10 days ago. Today, he tweeted out a letter to the Justice Committee requesting to testify. It reads in part, "I watched the testimony of the Honourable Jody Wilson-Raybould yesterday. I believe my evidence will be of assistance to the committee in its consideration of these matters." I want to bring in Honickman now. He joined us from time to time in the past couple of weeks to discuss the legal aspects of this case. Asher is with the Toronto law firm Matthews Abogado and is back again today. All right, so first of all, just your overall reaction to the testimony yesterday.
Well, first of all, Andrew, thanks for having me back. When I was here a couple of days ago, I think I ended by saying, you know, we've seen some smoke and now let's see if there's fire. And boy, was there fire. More fire than I thought we were going to see, more fire than I think a lot of people thought we were going to see. Not that extreme scenario that I was,
smoking
envisaging.
gun, not a smoking gun necessarily.
Exactly. You're not getting people actually giving her direct threats or saying you will do this or you will lose your job. But you are getting what she described as veiled threats, extreme, enormous pressure, that sort of thing, going far beyond, I think, what a lot of us thought we were going to see, because it seemed that the Liberals were confident in what she was going to say when they allowed her to speak. And so, and she asked for 30 minutes to make an opening statement. And again, everyone seemed okay with that, and then she comes out and says very, very damning things. Right
from the get-go. So as a trial lawyer, and you assess witness demeanor every day, basically,
Every day, yes.
So how did Jody Wilson-Raybould do giving her testimony?
Well, Andrew, she did fantastic. So when we look at witnesses, we look at two different things, credibility and reliability. Credibility is, do you believe them? And Jody Wilson-Raybould came across as someone who is articulate, forthright. She seemed to be harboring genuine emotion about this, but she wasn't getting emotional. That's sort of an important distinction. You could see that she was kind of bothered by this on a real personal level, but was still allowing herself to speak very clearly and really got her message out. And then reliability. This is a person who not only has an incredible recollection of what happened, but kept contemporaneous notes, text messages, emails. And what she's talking about wasn't just one event or two events. She's talking about a series of occurrences that happen over months that involve about 11 different people. So I, for one, as a lawyer, as someone who goes to court, goes to discoveries, assesses witnesses every day, she's one of the best witnesses I've ever seen, just in terms of her, how compelling she is.
She doesn't think anyone broke the law. Do you?
That's a really tough call. I mean, we don't know enough at this point. There's certainly enough there to investigate whether someone broke the law, but as I was saying last time...
So you think the RCMP should investigate?
I think there's enough of a basis for at least an investigation, because what has happened could speak to a conspiratorial intent to obstruct justice, for example. But having said that, we need to be careful, as I was saying last time, not to criminalize political conduct. The inappropriateness of what the government did here concerns their conduct, that they kept going back to her when she clearly, was very clear. She said, stop, I've made my decision. This is essentially amounting to pressure. They kept coming at her. The problem is, once you get into the criminal realm, you get past conduct and you get into intent. What was their intent in doing all this? Was it an intent to obstruct justice? That's a much more difficult thing to prove. And I think, in general, we have to err on the side of not criminalizing political conduct. But as I was saying, I do think there's enough there that it's not an outrageous allegation that the RCMP should at least look at it.
So you've assessed Jody Wilson-Raybould, how she was as a witness. What about the questioners? There are Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP members of that committee.
Yes. Well, I mean, when it comes to the NDP and Conservatives, you expected sort of softballs being lobbed down the middle for her, because, of course, anything she says against the government is just gravy for them. What I was surprised at was the questions coming from the Liberals on the committee. They were certainly not softballs in the sense that they were sort of throwing thinly veiled jabs at her, but they were just not good cross-examination type questions. They weren't put to her in a way that was going to elicit anything that was going to be helpful to them. I was really surprised just listening to it. It sounded unprepared. And candidly, I've seen much better examples of this in committee hearings before. Another MP who I went to law school with, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, I've seen him question Facebook executives. You know, you get someone on these committees, they can do these questions really well. I've seen it with a lot of MPs before, especially ones with legal training. But what we saw from these questioners was sort of just, you know, well, don't you think that XYZ, and then giving her a complete platform to reiterate everything that she believes and, you know, just refute their questions without anything pointed. For example, you didn't really see anything from the questioners saying, you know, why didn't you resign? You know, that they asked her, did you think about resigning? But there wasn't this sort of pointed question. If you thought that the Constitutional Convention had been breached, was it not your obligation to resign at that moment so that you could expose it to Canadians at that moment? It's pretty fortuitous.
It's a reasonable question.
Yes, they could have. It's pretty fortuitous, Ms. Wilson-Raybould, that you were eventually shuffled out of cabinet. But if you hadn't been shuffled out of cabinet, you would never have brought this story to light. You know, there was no questions like that. That would sort of force her into a corner. Now, she has good answers for those questions, and she touched on those during her testimony. I'm not saying she wouldn't have been able to answer them very adequately. She's very clearly a brilliant person. But my point is that from the Liberal side, it didn't even look like they were using the little bit of ammunition they had.
What is the significance of Gerald Butts saying that he wants to testify? Presumably, the committee is going to allow him to testify. What's the significance, do you think?
You know, at this point, all bets are off. I was surprised to hear what Jody Wilson-Raybould had to say. I have zero idea what Gerald Butts is going to say. It seems logical that if he's coming there, he's going to provide some kind of different perspective. And it's logical that not only would he have a different perspective, but that he would have some corroborating evidence. Anyone can come out and make a denial. The Prime Minister has made a denial. A lot of people have made denials in the last 24 hours. What we haven't seen yet is any corroborating evidence that will refute or even qualify what Ms. Wilson-Raybould put before the committee.
Because that was a distinction I was kind of making. You know, the Prime Minister is denying the characterization of what Jody Wilson-Raybould had to say, but I don't think that we've heard a denial of her words and of of what she said, of the conversations and the texts and the emails that took place. I don't think.
No, and like I was saying last time we were having this discussion, a lot of this can come down to nuances in terms of not only what was said, but how something is going to be reasonably interpreted. You know, aside from saying you must do X, there are different interpretations one can draw about whether they're being directed or pressured. What I was surprised about from Ms. Wilson-Raybould's testimony is how clearly it did seem like pressure, and not only pressure on one occasion, but coming back again and again and again. So the Prime Minister might be able to say, well, listen, I have a different sort of understanding of what the meaning of that conversation was. But what's going to be hard to deny is the sheer number of occasions that conversations happened on, what Ms. Wilson-Raybould said in response, you know, saying to the Prime Minister on one occasion, are you interfering with this investigation? You know, very pointedly putting it to him. And
I would strongly advise you not to.
Exactly. I would strongly advise you not to. And then we know that there was further interference after that point. That wasn't the end of the story. So it's hard to say that people in the government didn't reasonably understand the way their words were being perceived.
No, he did, in response to that question, he said, no, that's not what I'm doing here. Do you think that this is a constitutional crisis?
I don't think it's a constitutional crisis. That term can be sort of overused. A constitutional crisis sort of implies that the very nature of our Constitution is in peril and we don't know what to do. This is, I would say it's a breach of a constitutional convention. There's a constitutional convention against pressuring and interfering with the Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General withstood the pressure. She remained independent. That's very important. But the fact that the government was even attempting to pressure her, allegedly, is itself a breach of a convention. That doesn't amount to a constitutional crisis, though, because at the end of the day, governments breach the Constitution in various ways all the time. Every time a government passes a law that infringes charter rights, they breach the Constitution. There's remedies. Now, often the remedy is in a court. You know, a court will strike down a law, a court will say that a search and seizure was unreasonable, etc. The question here is, what's the remedy for any breach of a constitutional convention? I would argue the only remedy is the ballot box. It's up to the Canadian people at the end of the day. If they believe that a constitutional convention has been breached, you throw the bums out. And that is the first best remedy for any constitutional breach.
Asher, always great to hear from you. Thank you very much.